I'm going to introduce the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study for the new folks. For some of you, it's going to be obviously a review. We'll do some study updates just so you can get up to speed on some of the study updates and some upcoming projects we have in the works. So anyway, you guys know this is basically a cancer study, right? And our endpoints, primary endpoints are cancer, and we'll go over those. It's really the first study of its kind in the United States, and I think we could say probably in the world, although there are other longitudinal studies going on around the world, but not with quite the same sample collection. So you've probably heard of It's a Dog's Life in the UK, which is all online data collected on Labradors. And they have quite a few Labradors, but again, no biological sample kind of thing. It's self-reported data. We were enrolling dogs between 2012 when the study launched, about this time of the year in June. They did their first pilot dogs and then opened it up in August. So sometimes we celebrate our actual anniversary in August. That's why you'll often see those anniversary blogs and stories. We completed enrollment in March of 2015. And ultimately, there were 3,044 dogs enrolled because there were some dogs in the pipeline and almost ready to complete enrollment when we hit 3,000, so we let those other ones finish. And that's why we ended up with 3,044. And when it started, we're thinking 14 or 15 year long observational study, and there were numerous people who got the study off the ground with donations. And basically we're looking at lifestyle, genetics, nutrition, and environment, and how that impacts or affects cancer in dogs. Some of the criteria for enrollment, it was pretty strict. The dogs had to be 2 months to 2 years old, though generally we say we kind of went about 6 months to 2 years at the time they enrolled. They had to be in the lower 48 states, and that had to do a lot with shipping samples and the cost of shipping samples. They had to have a 2-generation pedigree that we could follow. The owner and veterinarian would be willing to comply with the study requirements, and I have pictures of the study, the questionnaires they have to fill out, which is always very impressive. And they have to be free from certain chronic or life-limiting diseases at the time of enrollment, though I can tell you, I know we have one hemophiliac dog that is in the study. But most of it was we didn't want that kind of confounding data when they came in. So they had to be healthy, essentially, when they signed up. So to go over the endpoints, there are 4 study primary endpoints, and it is 500 diagnoses of these endpoints, not deaths. Sometimes we go 500 deaths from this cancer, but it's not, 500 diagnoses. And the primary endpoints are high-grade mast cell tumor, hemangiosarcoma, osteosarcoma, and lymphoma, and you guys are probably know all of those cancers. You recall when Janet came in and talked about mast cell, they can fall into 2 categories, low grade and high grade, and really low grade are not really life-threatening. I mean, I guess if you really let them go for a long period of time, but the high grade are. So again, we're talking about life-threatening illnesses. Secondary endpoints are recurrence of the main outcomes. Interestingly, death is actually a secondary outcome. That's why it's not a primary endpoint. It's the diagnoses are death is a secondary outcome. Other ones we're really interested in are hypothyroidism. You guys know Golden Retrievers have a lot of hypothyroidism. They have a lot of allergies. We have heart failure, epilepsy, hip dysplasia, renal failure. But any other condition with an incidence of 4% or greater will be considered a secondary endpoint. Now, that being said, it does not mean that if your dog doesn't have one of those conditions, you don't write it down. It means you still write them down and report them, but those are at the onset of the study, the secondary outcomes. Now, if we see a high incidence, again, greater than 4% or greater, that's going to become a secondary outcome. We're not even close to that yet, okay? Other than maybe otitis externa, which is ear infections, which is the #1 diagnosis right now in the dogs. This is the questionnaire that you hear so much about. This is what everybody has to fill out every year. This is why they hate it, because it is really, really extensive, and there's lots of different categories. Just to kind of break it down, this is a great slide because it kind of breaks down Dogographics is pretty fun, and that's just their demographic information. Then sire and dam history. So we will ask these folks, even if they don't own the sire and dam anymore, do you know about what's happened to them? Because as you guys know, this is a pretty interconnected community, and they'll know that, oh my gosh, yeah, this dog's mother died of hemangiosarcoma. It's imperfect data because it can be secondhand, but it's actually collected, and there's ways of kind of cleaning it up. Littermate history, again, same thing. A lot of these people know where their siblings of their dog are and what they may die of. We have their reproductive history, physical activity. Obviously, OTC means over-the-counter medications, flea and heartworm prevention. Other medications like prescription meds are captured on the veterinary sheet. So, and sometimes that question comes up, right? I think, Katie, we had one where the lady was going, oh, my dog's on these medications. I don't see a place to do it. And it's like, no, your vet will actually capture those. Dental hygiene, grooming, look at the diet and feeding practices. It's huge. It even asks, I always tell people this, down to, do you feed raw peppers, and what color are the peppers? If you feed them bell peppers, what color are they? So that detailed. Environment and living, which could be, what's your primary flooring? What's your secondary flooring? Is it carpet, hardwood? Do you have another house? What's the primary flooring there? What kind of heat do you have? You know, so all of that stuff is captured in the environment and living. And the very last is the CBARC behavioral questionnaire. CBARC is actually a trademarked behavioral tool, and if you've never taken the CBARC test for your dog, I encourage you to do it. You go to University of Pennsylvania, you can have your dog take the test, you fill it in for them. Of course, you don't have to have their little feet going like this. And it's, right, it's a very talented dog. That's the first question, is your dog taking the test? No. Anyway, and it's really interesting. I did it for my dog, and you can find out, like I found out she's a compulsive licker. Which they're not sure what to do. Peanut and Emily would be compulsive lickers. But it's interesting, they're actually accumulating this data for their own database, and they look at it, but it's pretty cool stuff. But anyway, it's captured. And this is why people complain about filling out their questionnaire every year. So it's captured online, and that's the UBC database that we talk about. They're capturing that data. They're helping us collect that data. This is the kits. When people talk about their kits, their annual kits, this is what they get, shipped to them around the time of their anniversary. And it's got all the instructions and things in it, which still seems to bamboozle people sometimes, what's in there. I think because people just don't look at it often, or they don't unpack it. They take it to their vet and unpack.
So they get this year like that?
Every year they get it shipped out around their anniversary time. This is a good picture. So you go to the vet, and you do your stuff, and the veterinarian then fills this out. So they're going to fill out a more detailed health history with diagnoses and medications that they've prescribed or that have been reported to them. They have physical exam findings, again, medication history, and dermal mass and neoplasia history. Now, some of this, they fill out additional paperwork if they have a primary endpoint, like a tumor that they remove. So they get an additional veterinary visit, and they fill out more. So it's a lot of stuff. So you can understand the commitment and why compliance is high and why people get tired of it after a while. But it's a pretty extensive. So a couple of quick study updates. Just a little fun fact, 60% of our dogs are suburban, 30% rural, and 10% urban. And here's where they're all located, with most dogs in California, but the greatest number of dogs per capita in Colorado. And enrollment, we know this is unfortunately climbing. In the time when Missy made this a month ago to now, 7 more dogs have died. So we're up to 90 dogs deceased, and as you guys can understand, that's only going to get worse. 62 confirmed withdrawn, though we're going to try to update this because we have a plan in place. We're going to, now that the board meeting is over, we're going to reach out to the people who've only filled out their baseline questionnaire and then never come back again. Because if we can move them to the withdrawal category, our compliance will actually go up. And this is our compliance curve. And to read this, the baseline year 1 and year 2, those compliance rates will never change, right? Because all the dogs that can pass through them have now passed to a minimum of year 3, and some are at year 4 and 5. Those, so again, those compliance numbers will never change. That's a really good compliance compared to a human trial. So we're very happy about that. And again, if we can get the people who did 1 and have withdrawal drawn permanently, those compliance numbers actually for year 3 and 7 will go up a bit, because we can say they withdrew. So our withdrawal numbers will go up, but our compliance will be better because now they're counted in this as non-compliant. So this may change a little bit, but it's still really good, but we're keeping an eye on it, because I think, as putting my marketing hat on, and what we're seeing is you saw it. I mean, it gets to be a drag. And I got to take my dog in, I got to fill out all these forms, and I got to get the box, and the vets have to do stuff. And the vets can't be compliant till the owner's compliant. The owner has to fill out and start the process. So then the vets have to wait. Then we have to wait for the vets to finish for people to be completely compliant. So we have people at all stages there that again, they kind of feed on each other. But it is tough to keep people excited, right? As it's kind of going into those not so amusing years of, there's a lot of enthusiasm around enrollment, et cetera. But what we're hoping is we can get some data out there. This is another pie chart that talks about our outcomes. So we have our primary outcomes. We've had 22 dogs diagnosed, again, that's a primary outcome, with lymphoma, 3 with high-grade mast cell, and we've had 1 death, 14 hemangiosarcoma, but I got a call today, and that's going to be 15 pretty darn soon. 0 osteosarcoma, which is a little interesting because that was a primary endpoint that we have no dogs so far in that category, though we might see that change. Lymphoma has a bimodal distribution, which means which is kind of interesting. So you have a spike of dogs who will get lymphoma when they're quite young. Then we would expect it to drop and will maintain at a low level for a while, and then it spikes up again big time when they get old. So it's kind of an unusual cancer that way. High when they're young, and it tends to be more aggressive in general when they're younger. Then it goes down, then it goes up again. At least that's what's reported. So it'd be interesting to see. Again, 90 total deaths. So at this point, we, based on actuarial tables, the cumulative death loss due to primary endpoints at this time should be 24, and we're there. We're right on 24. The cumulative primary endpoint diagnoses, we expected 106 diagnoses by now, which we don't have. So we're way off on diagnoses. And all-cause mortality of about 80, which is about right. We're not far off of that. What I want to talk about is one of our projects. So actually we'll do this. So we have 15,000, almost 15,900 dog years accrued in this study. So average time contributed per study dog is 5.2 years, which is pretty cool. So upcoming projects. You guys have heard about the pilot studies, and I just want to update you on where those are. We had a pilot study done a little over a year ago, and it was looking at the microbiome of 24 dogs that were in the pipeline and had some samples collected, but never made it all the way through to enrollment. So the idea was, we'll do a proof of concept. Can we actually collect the samples, get the data to Chris Miller at UC Denver, and he runs it, and it was just a way of trying to grease the skids for getting the process of an RFP. So he looked at that and finished that study. Then we went and had a call, and we approved 4 studies. One is on genetics and fecundity, so that's today's $64,000 word. What is fecundity? How many babies you have. Right, fertility basically. So we're looking at puppy litter or litter size in that one. Another group is looking at what normal ranges on routine blood work. So if you get blood for your dog or us, right, they have a range, like this is the normal range, and most people or dogs fit in here. But somebody wanted to check that out, especially over time. Like, does your normal change over time as you get older? For example, we have kidney things. Well, maybe a normal dog that never develops kidney disease has a normal, it increases over time. So what we call a normal range for a 2-year-old is maybe not a normal range for a 10-year-old, and they're perfectly healthy, and you don't have to go like, oh, they got kidney disease. You know, maybe that's normal aging. There's some stuff on a routine blood work that we already give a little pass to young dogs. For example, their phosphorus tends to be a little higher. We just go, oh, young dog, not to worry. Oh, their alkaline phosphatase, which is a liver enzyme, a little high, not to worry, because that's also bone derived, and if they're growing, so there are some things we do in our mind when we read blood work that we already make adjustments, and again, maybe we have to do it when we're older. The group in Helsinki, so you guys have probably heard, we've been talking to Finland about, they're the ones looking at the metabolomics of atopy and hypothyroidism, and what they're trying to do is look at samples to see how does your metabolism change, and it's basically they're looking to make a diagnostic test. Atopy, which is allergy, is notoriously difficult to diagnose in dogs. You have to do skin testing. So if you guys have ever had the skin testing like this, you shave a big spot on their side and you do the same thing. And it's a big deal and it's often expensive. They're trying to find a shorter way of doing that. There are, quote, blood tests for allergies. People have developed them. They are, I'm going to go on camera, not worth it, don't do it, right to the camera. And so, however, this would be maybe a legitimate blood test, right? Your metabolism changes because you've got allergies. And the last one is the fecal microbiome in lean versus overweight dogs. Lots and lots of studies on this in people. And no surprises, lean and overweight people have different microbiomes, but they're looking at it. Same guy, Chris Miller at UC Denver, is going to be looking at that. So stay tuned. Now, the projects that Missy is going to do in-house, one is all-cause mortality in dogs under 3 years of age. And I have a graph on this, so I'll talk more about it. You guys have heard a lot about the spay-neuter thing and the timing of spay-neuter. And I think the first thing that Missy's going to do, I mean, she did a little bit with overweight, and you guys have heard that, that preliminary data, though that's a moving target, right? Because as dogs age, more dogs may get spayed or neutered. So stay tuned on that, on what the age and how likely you are to be overweight. But what she's looking at is orthopedic injury, non-traumatic. So what's a non-traumatic injury? Tweak your knee, right? So torn cruciate ligaments. And she wants to look at, there's a lot of discussion that there may be, if you spay or neuter dogs too early, especially large breed dogs, they need so much hormone dose. So that could be how many times you went through a heat cycle, what's your testosterone level, to get fully developed ligaments. And right now the recommendation is for large breed dogs, at least wait till they're over a year, sometimes first heat cycle. So I did that with Emily, which was tough, but we did it because she's a large breed dog. And the thought is that gives them enough time for their joints and their tendons to grow properly such that they're less likely to have an injury. However, no one's really looked at it in a prospective way. And we're going to look at it, and that would be huge. Obviously, if you have a big fat dog, you're trying to figure out, well, what does the weight have to do with maybe orthopedic injury? So that's going to be factored in there. Does weight, is it confounding factor? Can we still say even a lean dog that was spayed early has a higher risk of tweaking a ligament than a dog, even if they're, again, does the weight factor in or not? I think our early data would suggest it is not associated. So even a skinny dog that gets spayed early might be more likely to tear a ligament. So we'll stay tuned for that. And then the other is it's CBARC as a function of sex and age over time. There's a lot of interest in, does your behavior change over time? If you're a dog that's frightened of thunder and you try to manipulate that or teach dogs not to be afraid of thunder, or you don't do anything, do they just mellow out over time? Do their behaviors change? And no one has ever looked at that in a longitudinal way. And I think that's gonna be one of the things that we look at soon. So stay tuned for all that. The first one we're gonna do probably is the all-cause mortality paper. In dogs under 3 years, under or equal to 3 years, I think we have 37 dogs. That's not very large amount. So bear that in mind. That's not very many dogs. It's 1% of our population who died. What is really interesting are two. The yellow pie slice is cancer, which is really unusual in dogs under 3 years of age. Another is accidental death, 14% of our dogs, and you guys, or 22%, I'm sorry, and you guys have heard some of the tragic, we had some house fires, we had some hyperthermia incidents, we have some infectious disease, but it's only 14%. And why Missy and I got really, really excited about this is, I would say, knock on wood, almost every other paper published is completely different from this in mortality of dogs under 3 years of age. It's almost all infectious disease. By far and away, hands down, the major killer of dogs in this age group, and it's completely different than what we found. Now, is that just golden retrievers living in the lower 48 states? Maybe. You know, some people will argue, well, maybe you don't have a representative population. I would argue we do. We have people who own their dogs and love their dogs and take them and get them vaccinated and care for them. So maybe this is more representative of what young dogs die of than what's been reported. But we're going to look at this. This is probably the first paper we're going to write this year, this fiscal year, and get this out there. And part of the reason to do it is, as if you heard Rod talk the other day, is some of it's preventable, right? And some of it is maybe you better be watching for cancer in dogs. That a third of our dogs had cancer under 3 years of age that were a cause of death. So again, I think it could inform how people practice medicine, which is, what do you tell an owner who comes in with a dog and they're young, right? We tell them, in the past, we'd say infectious disease kills dogs, so you better get them vaccinated. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there's all these other potential causes of death that they need to be considering. So that's kind of an exciting finding, but we have a few more statistics. This is just kind of raw stuff, right? Really easy to run. A few more things to look at, and review of the literature. The last thing I wanted to talk about, or pretty close to the last thing, is you probably heard about the data and sample access and the IP stuff and blah, blah, and we've been working on it for a while. And it got voted on and approved by the board. So what we're gonna have is a 3-tiered system. We are gonna have tier 1 is gonna be like, somebody made a good suggestion, MAF Commons. And what we'll have is open access to the data. That means all those people who are filling out those questionnaires, that data will be open. There will be an embargo for our partners, because we embargo the data for a year at a time, but we will probably open that up to people so they can come in and play. They can get a hold of the data, it'll be anonymized, and they'll be able to come in, and then we will have people writing papers. They just have to cite us. We're still working out the process of how do you limit it, but a lot of places just you have to have a .edu, and then you can have access to the data. And then you'll probably sign something like, that you're not going to sell it to Antec, or Antec already has access to it, but you're not going to sell it to somebody. The second tier is academic reviewed, which is kind of what we're doing right now. Those are the RFPs. So we give them access to data. We give them the samples for free. We don't charge these guys when they ask for samples. The only thing we'll ask them for is recovery, because it costs us when Fisher pulls the samples, but it'll essentially be, open and fairly and free for, again, academics. But this time we're going to review the RFPs because we don't want to release samples. Some of the samples are precious. We only have so many of them, so we'll do that in a similar fashion. The last is commercial R&D access, and that'll be negotiated. So if a company comes to us, they're going to have to pony up a bit and we'll figure out what they need and what they want, and then we'll be able to hopefully sell some data and samples to different companies. A lot of people, like you saw the folks in Helsinki, that's a university, but there are a lot of interest in making diagnostic tests. Like, you guys have all heard of liquid biopsies, right? Now, are there markers? We have data like those dogs that develop lymphoma. What changes? If you have 10 years of data, does something change in their blood? That would be a very early marker of cancer, because the earlier you can catch it, right, the better off you are. So it would be very interesting if people could develop, again, diagnostic tests from that, but that would be something that they'd have a different kind of access. So last couple things, you've heard us talk about the Fisher oversight audit that's going on right now. Fisher is where we store our biosamples, and if you haven't seen, and then I think it's the Next Girls quarterly, we got pictures of like samples coming out of liquid nitrogen and that kind of stuff. And it's all about what happens when a sample leaves the dog to when it gets biobanked at Fisher. And we now have 400,000 about biologic samples that are being stored at Fisher, and that's only going to get more, in various different really cool things. Like some are in just a regular cold room, and some of them are in what would be like our freezers, and some of them are at -80, and some of them are in liquid nitrogen, which is 193 degrees, minus 193 Celsius, I believe. And they're kept in all these different rooms, and people watch them, and they have like people carry pagers if one of the temperature goes up a bit, and that's what Fisher does. That's their occupation, is really maintaining a biorepository. And Heather and Missy's flown out tomorrow morning. They put on the bunny suits, I guess, and get to walk around Fisher. And the issues we're looking at, what prompted it is it's kind of due diligence and making sure they're doing a good job. Second is we get like a manifest. They send us, here's your samples, just to give you an inventory of what you have. They also help us with, we have to be able to match the samples because they put their code on it with the samples of the data, right? It's not going to help us if, Sierra's data over here doesn't match Sierra's data over here. So we have to be able to match that up. And so it will help us with our bookkeeping, basically, to look at this. And also we're going to be reviewing our contracts and stuff for that. And then we will have a full report to the board in October. And then the last two things we're doing is, I mentioned UBC. UBC, just for you guys you'll probably hear us talk about UBC all the time. Well, what does UBC do? They're actually they do our call center. So when people call in, they answer the phone. Morris Animal Foundation, they escalate stuff up to us if we need to. I just got off the phone with someone who said, I think I found cancer in this dog, what do I do? And we walk them through the biopsy procedure, get that kit out we sent you, and put the samples in the formalin and do it this way. UBC also helps capture our data as far as our online questionnaires. So the veterinary and the owner, and they house a lot of the data is sitting there. The dog's name, it has a number, and all of that. So they help us with that on two ends. They answer the phones at the call center. They send out those boxes you just saw. They have reminders. They send out the annual gifts. They send out biopsy kits. But they also help us project manage this particular giant study because that's what they do as a business. They do mostly, though, by far and away, human health studies. So if you're at Harvard and you're going to run a health study, you don't really run it at Harvard. You contract UBC and they help you run your study. And that's what they do. So just so you know, when we talk about UBC, UBC is separate from Fisher. And we're also going to have a site visit with UBC. We usually go out about once a year to the call center and actually go to West Virginia. And Michael and Tiffany visited their main offices, which are in Kansas City. So they're kind of spread out throughout the United States. And of course, we have the databases, and we have Coyote, and Zach, and Coyote especially, is moving our database out of mainly the UBC pot where they're holding it in-house. And the reason for that is if we want to have like MAF Commons, we have to have, it'll be easier for us to manage and control and probably better for the data if it sits in-house. So it'll be a custom-made program. It sits in-house, we watch it, and we'll move that out of UBC. Is that like explain it in a non-technical, like my level of understanding way?
And they've got the data in a more kind of raw form, and it's not really the form that people can use it to do the work.
Right, right. It's all computer language. It's like SAS is some of it, and
it's in proprietary.
Right, right. So
something will be available.
right, because we have to have it where if we're going to let people play in the data, they got to be able to understand it and be able to get it, right? So we'll bring it in-house and take care of it here, which is actually going to make it easier for us too when someone requests samples for Missy to kind of. She develops a pick list based on the UBC data, and then she goes to Fisher and says, go get these samples and send them here. And I send them serum samples and these samples. So it'll be, I think, better in the long run for us to house it in-house, and it'll allow people to have free access. So anyway, that is all I wanted to talk about today. All right, thank you, you guys.